Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, this is At the Helm Sports. I'm your host, Derek Helm. Thank you for joining me for episode 147. Please be sure to follow and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Leave those 5-star reviews. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Hit that like button down in the comments section. Let me know, who do you think is going to be the highest scoring running back this week outside of Jordan Mason? Because it looks like basically everybody's going to be going there. But interesting to see who do you think is going to be up there as far as the running backs go this week on DraftKings? And that's what we're going to be diving into is the main slate mainly for DraftKings. Might have a couple betting angles. Nothing really has stood out to me so far, but we're going to go game by game here and go through this slate. It is a big one, so we might as well dive right into it. We have 13 games on the slate, starting off with the Las Vegas Raiders heading to Baltimore. Now, from the Raiders' standpoint, really not a lot that I want to do here. Obviously, they did not look good last week against the Chargers. J.K. Dobbins ran all over them, so I would assume that Derrick Henry would probably be able to be pretty productive there at $6,700. Now, I do think that he will get some ownership just for that narrative and for his price, but I don't see him really getting too out of control. So I will probably have quite a bit of him there. From the Vegas standpoint, really probably the only guy that I'm even looking at is Brock Bowers at 4,400. So if I wanted to do a skinny stack of this game, it would probably be the two of them. Bowers had 8 targets in his first ever game. Would have to expect that this offense is going to try and get him the ball as much as possible going forward. If you're going for Lamar stacks, 7,700, a little bit of a lofty price for him. Obviously, we saw him run a ton of times. I don't expect him to run the ball 16 times every week, more so when needed. Don't know how much it's going to be needed in this, but the Raiders defense is not great. So you could see Lamar get there possibly in the passing game. You could pair him with Zay Flowers, 6,300. I could see Flowers potentially having a big game here. And then the big question in this game is going to be Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely. Now, obviously, Likely had the huge game. For a lot of people, it might not even be a question. They are going with Likely. They used their waivers or fab budget and season long to go out and get Likely after that performance last week. But I don't think it's that cut and dry. I do think that Mark Andrews is still has plenty left in the tank. He was used quite a bit. Spagnola made it a point to take him completely out of that game. So I do think that they were covering him against the Chiefs, and I could see him definitely being much better as the year goes on. So I do think that this is a spot here where if people are going to Likely, paying up $200 for Andrews at 5,000 actually makes a lot of sense. And you don't even necessarily have to pair him with Lamar. I think that Andrews at 5,000, we've seen it pay off enough that actually could be a pretty good play there. Next is Carolina and the Chargers. Now, this one, obviously, Carolina didn't look good at all. So probably really can't go to anyone there. And I mean, literally anyone. Most people are probably going to want to go to J.K. Dobbins, 5,400. He looked good. Obviously, got chased down and kind of ran out of gas there at the end. Still only had 13 touches. So maybe because of the performance that goes forward, but that's not really what Roman has done. And I could see Gus Edwards being the guy that comes out here. And would anybody be surprised if Gus Edwards came out against this terrible Carolina team and scored 2 touchdowns? So if J.K. Dobbins is getting up there in ownership, I actually think Edwards is a pretty nice pivot there against a terrible Carolina team at only $5,200. So definitely looking at that. If you wanted to get cute in this game, definitely not stacking it. Like I said, I want nothing to do with Carolina. Obviously, after 1 week, we don't know everything. There could be some productive players on this team as the season goes on, but until I see it, I'm fine staying away from it. But if you wanted to get cute, I could see Herbert at only 5,800. And if you wanted to pair him with maybe Lad McConkey, I think that's an okay stack, and it's pretty cheap if you just wanted to get a pretty cheap stack and be on your way. But I worry about how much the upside there really is there. Although we just saw Derek Carr obviously do what he did last week, so you could make a case that it could work out. Next, we have New Orleans at Dallas. Speaking of Derek Carr, don't really love him as much in this matchup, so probably not going there. I don't think that too many people will. I do like Kamara here, 7,000. Obviously, he's going to get a huge workload as long as he is healthy, so do like that. I do expect Taysom Hill to get mixed in there in the backfield. So in some larger field stuff, if you wanted to go to him at only 3,900, I think it makes sense. Foster Moreau is questionable at the moment, but he looked like he's going to be the main tight end hit there, but Jawan Johnson will get mixed in for red zone looks. So probably want to stay away from the tight ends as a whole, but I think you could maybe mix in Taysom Hill just because of those random 2 touchdown games we see from him. As far as the wide receivers go on New Orleans, Shaheed obviously had the big game, and that's what he's going to do. He's going to be a boom bust player, not going to get a ton of targets at 4,600. I worry about him being able to get there against this Dallas defense, but he does have that upside. So if you wanted to go there, I think it's fine. If he even gets up there a little bit in ownership, though, I am fine fully fading. And I actually like Olave quite a bit this week, 6,400. I think that this game, New Orleans is going to have to play keep up here, and he should get the bulk of the target. So 6,400 for the role that Olave has and the ability he possesses, I actually like quite a bit. On the Dallas side, it's basically Dak and CD or bust. There's really not much that I'm chasing here. I don't want Zeke. I don't want Dowdle. Brandon Cooks, if you're really trying to stack this game, I think makes sense if you wanted to go with CD and Brandon Cooks, or maybe Brandon Cooks and another pass catcher, but the wide receivers are pretty thin here. I will say that Luke Schoonmaker at only 2,900 makes a lot of sense in Dak stacks because he's cheap. We've seen him produce before, and Ferguson is probably going to be out for this game. Dak likes to target the tight end, so I think Schoonmaker as a cheap tight end piece makes a lot of sense. I don't know that I would necessarily play him by himself at his price. I guess you could make a case for it, but I'd probably more so want him tied to Dak. Next, we have Tampa Bay at Detroit. Now this is a big game here. We have an over 50. Obviously, we saw what Detroit did last week with the Rams, and they came away with the win, but didn't really look extremely explosive. And that game was a bit of a slog at times, especially in the first half. But we could definitely see this being a high scoring game and potentially even going over that 50 point or 51 point total. So I think you can make a case for Baker stacks. Obviously, people are going to want to play Baker at only 5,900 after last week and seeing how many people took down GPPs with him. And with Godwin at 6K, I think it makes a ton of sense. I think that will probably be the more popular stack is just with the week that Godwin had and a $1,500 savings. Maybe they skip over Evans in those stacks. Some people might go with both of them, but it gets a little bit expensive. So I love Evans from a standalone standpoint. Just if you wanted to play him and a skinny stack with someone from Detroit, I think that makes sense if that's your exposure to this game. I do expect Evans to be a little bit lower owned than Godwin. You can make a case to play McMillan. He was on the field a ton, ran, I think it was 86% of the routes last week. So if he's going to be out there at only 3,600, he makes a ton of sense in Baker stacks. And then also, you can make a case for Kate Otten at 3,600, similar to what I said with Schoonmaker. I'm not going to play him by himself, but if you're playing Baker stacks and you go Baker Evans and wanted a cheap piece, with Otten, I think that makes sense. If you wanted to bring it back with one of the more expensive Lions players, that's not a bad stack there. As far as the Lions go, I do like Goff 6,400. Didn't look great last week, but another home game inside a dome. I think you can definitely make a case for him. I love Amon Ra this week. I don't know that the projections or Sims are necessarily going to love him. I don't think he's going to be very popular because a lot of people saw him fall on his face last week. But at 8,100, I think he's going to get looked over. A lot of people will go up to CD or go down and pay down at wide receiver below him. So I think it's a nice bounce back spot. A lot of people overreact to week one. So I think it's a great spot for him. And one of the main reasons is because of what Jameson Williams did last year. Now, obviously, he is a clearly talented receiver. It's taken a couple years for him to get there and for them to use him as such. He is questionable, so definitely want to keep an eye on that. I do think the Q tag potentially can keep some people off of him. But at 5,300 after the game that we just saw last week, I do expect him to have some ownership if he is playing. I don't know necessarily if I wanted to go with Goff, if I would pair Amon Ra and Jameson. That just doesn't seem like it works very well. It would probably be one of the two, and maybe Laporta at 6,300 though. That gets very expensive really, really quickly. So I don't know if you necessarily want to double stack there or triple stack. And as far as the running backs go, it's basically a split right down the middle. It's 6,000. I think Montgomery gets a little bit more ownership, similar to what I said with the Evans Godwin situation. You have a $1,600 savings, so obviously Montgomery gets a lot of the work, gets a lot of goal line work. I do think that in this game, Tampa Bay is a little bit better defending the run than they are the pass. And I could see Gibbs getting a little bit more work in this one and potentially being a little bit more productive. So I'm fine paying up at 6,600 for him. But I think they both make great bring back pieces in Baker stacks. So if you wanted to go there, that definitely makes some sense. Next, we have Indy at Green Bay. Now, this one looks like might be a little bit of rain in Green Bay. Obviously, Jordan Love is not going to play in this game. Malik Willis is an absolute dumpster fire. So, probably really hurts Josh Jacobs, who is currently listed as questionable. We actually might get Emmanuel Wilson at 4,500, who looked okay at spots last week. But I just think with Willis in there, there's really not much you can take away from this Green Bay offense. Maybe Jaden Reed, but he's 6,000 and they're going to design plays to him and get the ball in his hands. And he is very talented. So you can definitely make a case for it. I think he will be low owned. And Anthony Richardson, again, should be one of the highest owned quarterbacks on the slate. He is just perfect for what we want from fantasy and especially daily fantasy, just running the ball and taking absolute long shots. So I expect him to be one of, if not the highest owned quarterback. And the question is, who do you pair him with? Because if he's only going to complete 9 passes, I don't know if it makes a lot of sense with Pittman. At 6,600, it's not a terrible price for him, but is he going to get the target volume that he needs? Now, obviously, he's a talented wide receiver. I do think that he could potentially get there, but it would probably only be larger field stuff for me. And probably staying away from it altogether. A lot of people will chase Alec Pierce 4,500, and then a lot of people will probably pair Richardson with Adonai Mitchell because he's only 4K. And obviously, if he even catches one of those bombs that we saw last week, it's a totally different story. He's probably more expensive and a lot more popular, but I do think he is very, very explosive. He can get behind the defense. We saw him continually getting open last week. So I lean Adonai Mitchell over the other two. And I might even just play him by himself as a low owned piece, but probably makes a little bit more sense with Richardson because he's not going to get a ton of volume. So really, if it's only one explosive play, you probably want that tied to Richardson, and this way you can double dip on that rather than just getting the one big play for just Adonai Mitchell at 4K. And then Jonathan Taylor, 7,700. Because Richardson's so popular, I don't think he's going to garner a ton of ownership. Now, the worry here is at 7,700, he's not going to catch too many passes with Richardson back there, but he's going to get a ton of work. And obviously, Green Bay just got absolutely murdered by Saquon. I do think that Jonathan Taylor at this point of his career is still a little bit more talented than Saquon. Some people might not agree with that, but regardless, I do think that he is still an extremely talented running back. And at 7,700, if people are going to overlook him, I think it makes sense to pay up for him in what should be a good game for this Indy offense. Now we have Cleveland at Jacksonville. This one, it's going to be quick for me. I don't like much here. I really don't think that you can rely on Deshaun Watson too much. I think the shoulder is a little bit more of an issue than they are leading on. I don't think it's just him being washed. We did see him in flashes last year play okay, not necessarily what vintage Watson was, but it just looks like he can't even get the ball to anybody now. I think that shoulder really is bothering him on some of these throws. So it's going to be hard to make a case for any of these guys. Njoku is out, so maybe you make a case for Jordan Akins at only 3,000 as a really cheap piece here if you wanted to use someone on the Jacksonville side. Cleveland's defense, I do still think is talented despite what Dallas was able to do last week. So I really don't love Trevor Lawrence stacks at only 5,700. It is tempting, but I don't necessarily know if I want to go there. At ATN 7,200, with the amount of work that Bigsby got last week, it's concerning. I don't know that I want to pay up for it. Now, you can make a case that he will be low owned and is still a talented running back that'll get some work. So maybe it works out, but I'm willing to be burned by it. Kirk, I think, is definitely in play at 5,500 against this defense. If they are getting pressure on Lawrence, they may look to get the ball out quicker rather than taking deep shots. And that just screams Christian Kirk and Evan Ingram here. So I do think the two of them make sense as standalone pieces. Gabe Davis, I don't love in this game. As I said, he's probably more of a deep threat. I do think that you can make a case for Brian Thomas Jr. at only $4,800. The price and the talent, what we saw last week, and just he was continually opening similar to what I said with Adonai Mitchell, and he is definitely a better talent than Mitchell. So at only 4,800, I definitely think you can make a case there. If he was the only piece that you wanted to play from this game, I would be fine with that and might even do it myself. Next, we have San Francisco at Minnesota. Now, San Francisco obviously looked great Sunday night or Monday night, and they basically shut the Jets down. The big talk here is going to be Jordan Mason. It looks like McCaffrey's going to miss. So Mason is going to be uber chalk, potentially the highest owned player that we see on any slate this year. And for good reason. I mean, he got all the work. He looked great against what is at least thought of as a good defense. 5,200 is just way too cheap for the workload he's going to get and for what we just saw him do on Monday. So I do like that quite a bit. 5,200. It's you're going to have to make a decision. It's basically, I mean, you're probably going to want to play him in at least 60% of your lineups because I could see him potentially pushing over 50% ownership at this price. Now, the funny thing would be everybody was burned by McCaffrey on Monday night because, right before game time, he's not playing. Now, watch this week. Everybody's got 80% Mason in their lineups, and all of a sudden, right before game time, it's, oh, yeah, McCaffrey's going to go. So I could see that happen. That would be pretty funny. So as far as the Mason chalk goes, I think in lineups where you don't want to use him, you could use the Niners passing game as leverage. Now, Debo probably makes the most sense at 6,800, so he probably will be the highest owned outside of Mason as far as the 49ers go. Going to get some running attempts, probably get some goal line carries. So that probably makes the most sense. But if you wanted to go Purdy and go Kittle, or I do think that Ayuk wasn't a full go on Monday, so he should get more acclimated as the season goes on. So if you wanted to go with a Purdy stack and maybe bring it back with an Aaron Jones or Justin Jefferson, I think that actually makes a ton of sense and is a great contrarian way to build in larger field GPPs. Because as I said, Mason's going to be uber chalk. So if you go the passing route and they end up getting there through the passing route, I think that makes a ton of sense. As far as Sam Darnold goes, obviously you could make a case to stack him against the Giants. I don't love it in this one. For me, it would probably only be Aaron Jones at 6,100 and Justin Jefferson at 8,300. I do like Jefferson quite a bit. I will say that people that are probably trying to skinny stack this game are probably going to go Jordan Mason, Justin Jefferson. So just keep that in mind. But it's not a bad stack, and that's probably part of the reason why a lot of people will be considering it. Next, still in the 1 o'clock games, Seattle at New England. This one's a little bit weird because obviously New England beat Cincy last week. Cincy had multiple chances to win that game, had a Gesicki touchdown called back, which screwed me on an early only slate. Would have probably taken that one down, but Kenneth Walker dealing with the abdominal issue. I don't know if he's going to go. If he does, 6,300. Hopefully, the Q tag keeps some people off of him because obviously he is incredibly talented. Probably want to play him over the passing game in this one. I do think that New England's defense is pretty good, but I do like DK Metcalf. Now that he's under 6K, 5,900, I think is a good price for him. The fact that Sertan shut him down last week probably keeps a lot of people off of him, and he would be my preferred play here. Obviously, you can always make a case for Lockett or Jackson Smith and Jigba, but I don't know from week to week, you're not really going to know who it's going to be there. I do still think that DK will be the alpha in this grub offense, so I'd probably lean towards Metcalf and Kenneth Walker. Then on the New England side, it's basically Ramondre Stevenson or nobody, 6,200. They should still rely on him quite a bit. He was basically their whole offense last week. But for that reason, I could see Seattle keying in a little bit. Obviously, they did a pretty good job shutting down the Broncos running game, but they're not as talented as Ramondre. So you can make a case that you can go there skinny stack wise if you wanted to go DK and Ramondre. That's pretty much the only things I'm considering in this one. Next, we have the New York Jets at the Tennessee Titans. Now, the Jets, it's very, very easy. It's basically Brees Hall, it's Garrett Wilson. That's it. People will chase Lazard, and I'm just not going there. Obviously, he's going to have his games. I could see him finishing the season with 10 touchdowns. Just he's the only reason Rodgers is the only reason why Lazard is even on this team. And they have so much of a rapport. He will look to him. So he'll have his games, but I'm just not going to chase it right after Monday night. On the Tennessee side, you can make a case for Pollard at 5,900, but I do think that Spears actually matches up a little bit better against this defense. And if Tennessee does get behind, I expect it to be Spears, but probably really not going anywhere on this Tennessee side. Really don't like this game a lot. I could see it being a bit of a slog and a slower pace, lower scoring game. So it would be Brees and Garrett Wilson for me, and then maybe the Tennessee defense because I do think that that is going to be their best unit this year. I do think that they are talented, and Rodgers didn't look incredible on Monday night, so you could definitely make a case for that. Next, we have the New York Giants at the Washington Commanders. This game is gross. Now, both defenses looked absolutely putrid last week. So, obviously, Jaden Daniels, 6,200, is going to get a ton of work. But I could see him being incredibly popular at 6,200. The price is a little elevated. He didn't look good throwing the ball at all. So, if this Giants front can even just contain him a little bit, if Daniels didn't get that second touchdown last week, it's not that great of a game. So 6,200, I don't know. I probably play some lineups with him, but I don't know how crazy I'm going to get. I like Brian Robinson a little bit. I do think that he's an underrated back. I think he has some talent at 5,800 against this Giants defense. You could see him scoring two touchdowns here. And if that takes away from Jaden Daniels chalk, then that could actually make some sense. I don't want to go back to Terry McLaurin, but we could see them design some plays to get him the ball early. So 5,700, it would probably only be in larger field stuff. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to get there, but I guess you can make a case for it if you're stacking him with Jaden Daniels. Now Daniel Jones 5,300, it's disgusting in large field. I might actually go there. I do actually see the projections liking him a little bit. So maybe that gets some people on him, but probably not because it's Daniel Jones. But I mean, last year he had 6 points week one, and I think he came back with 31 points in week two. So that's what Daniel Jones does. He's not good, but from a daily fantasy standpoint, he can get you potentially over 100 rushing yards. And if he throws a touchdown to Malik Neighbors on top of it, then it pays off that low salary. Speaking of Malik Neighbors at 5,900, if he was the only piece that you wanted to play in this game, obviously we saw what Evans and Godwin were able to do last week. So I think he's incredibly talented, even though Daniel Jones is terrible. If he gets him the ball even five times, I think Neighbors could pay off this 5,900 price tag. So do like that. Finally, we are in the 4 o'clock slate, three games here. This one should be very popular. We have the Rams at the Cardinals. Now, Stafford looked pretty good on Sunday night. Obviously, with Puka out, Cooper Cup 14 receptions, $7,600 is way too cheap for him. So I expect him to be uber chalk. If you're playing cash games, basically you're starting your lineup with Jordan Mason and Cooper Cup and then going from there. So I like Cup here, but I don't necessarily know if I want to play Stafford. This game could be higher scoring, but they're missing a couple offensive linemen here. So I lean towards just Cup and Kyron Williams. Everybody that was worried about the punt return stuff, it didn't matter. Kyron Williams is still far and away the workhorse for this backfield. 6,800, I think, is a great price for him. So the two of them make a ton of sense. I do like Kyler stacks here, 6,600. I think you can absolutely make a case pairing him with Marvin Harrison, 6,900. I think the coaching staff is going to say, Kyler, listen, this is our guy. You need to get him the ball. Enough of this Greg Dortch nonsense. You guys can blow each other after the game because Harrison, obviously, everybody's going to point out the play where he was wide open and Kyler didn't see him. But I do think that they make it a point to get the ball in Harrison's hands. And I think if you wanted to play Harrison as a standalone, it makes sense as well. But I do like Kyler stacks. You can use Dortch at 4,600. Just obviously from a PPR standpoint, he's going to get some catches. And then McBride at 6K is definitely one of the most talented tight ends on the slate. So there's a lot to like in this game. And I think if you wanted to, you could definitely make a nice little stack here. It gets a little expensive, especially with the guys that I said that I like on the Ram side. So I also like Connor too. If you wanted to play him as a standalone piece here, 6,400 just gets a ton of the work, not primarily as much as Kyron Williams, but he's going to get most of the work. He gets the passing game work, plenty of rushing, and I do think he has some upside there. So, like I said, there's a lot of ways to stack that game. That'll probably be by far the highest owned game in the late slate. But this next one might actually be a better one to target. Now, Cincinnati obviously looked horrendous. Joe Burrow's hand apparently is hurt, despite them not really saying much about it. There's the video of him barely being able to pick up a water bottle, so that was pretty weird. But I think you can make a case for Jamar Chase here. 7,800 is a little bit hefty for what he was last week, but it's still Jamar Chase. I definitely think you can make a case to play him. Now, similar to what we saw with what they did with Mark Andrews, it's potentially bracket coverage, double coverage on Chase the entire game if Higgins can't go, and maybe they shut him down a little bit. So you can kind of make a case against it, but I love the KC side here. Even if Cincinnati can't keep up in this game, I think you can make a case for Mahomes at 7K. Obviously, pairing him with Rashi Rice 6,700. Rice is probably too cheap. We saw what Worthy can do last week, 6,100 for him. So if you wanted to pair Mahomes with either one of them, I think it makes sense. If you wanted to pair Mahomes with two of these guys, I do think that you probably want to rely on a Cincinnati guy to make that work because Cincinnati's going to have to do something for Mahomes to throw enough to get two of these guys there. I think now maybe not because Worthy can just have a huge play and Rice gets all the volume, but I absolutely think that Kelsey's in play here too. 6,200 is probably a little lofty for what people want to pay for him now that these other options are here, but he's still Travis Kelsey. So it gets a little expensive if you're stacking the Mahomes side, but if you just wanted to go Mahomes to Kelsey, how many times have we seen that pay off? And yeah, there's these other weapons here, but you can't tell me that Kelsey is not still going to have some Kelsey games this year. And I think it's absolutely makes a ton of sense to go there this week. Then Isaiah Pacheco, 6,900. Look at what Ramondre did last week. He was just beasting this Cincinnati defense. So Pacheco is going to get a ton of work. 6,900 is a good price for him. So I definitely think that if you wanted to just play Pacheco and be on your way in this game, it makes sense. But I am interested on the Mahomes side and some stacks there. Last game we have Pittsburgh Steelers at Denver Broncos. This one is disgusting, and I want nothing to do with it. Literally nothing. Pickens looked okay last week. I don't think that it's going to be good this week. He's obviously going to have Sertan on him, and Fields is starting. So you can make a case to start Fields at 5,400, but I don't know if he's going to have too much success against this Broncos defense with his rushing upside, if you wanted to just play Fields and be on your way, I think that's fine. The backfield is a mess for the Steelers. I want nothing to do with it. The backfield is even more of a mess for the Broncos. I want nothing to do with it. Bo Nix showed nothing, so I don't really want to trust Sutton yet. So that's pretty much it. If you wanted to make a case for McLaughlin at 4,500 just because of the savings and hope that he gets you 6 catches for 60 yards, maybe, but I just don't really see a lot of upside there. So that's pretty much all I'm looking at so far this week. From a betting standpoint, there really wasn't much that stood out to me. Now, I don't really know as at Wednesday first look show. There'll definitely be some things that jump out. Oddly enough, with some of these larger spreads, I do think that it makes you can make a case for maybe making an alt line parlay, maybe throw three teams that you like together, maybe just knock them down a couple points so that they make sense and maybe go that way. That can make a little bit of sense, or even a teaser and tease some guys down, some teams down to a pick 'em. But overall, as I said, nothing really jumped off the board to me. Obviously, check out thehelmsports.com in the My Bets tab. I will have everything up there. Also, the MadLabMMA.com. We have the Sphere coming up this week. Going to be a huge card. MadLab will have everything covered in there. And then obviously, Lab and myself will break down the DFS slate for Sunday morning. So check that out. All my bets go right into the Discord the second I make them. And then also check out yardsperfantasy.com. I will have my Thursday night write up and not cash game this week, just still don't really like playing cash games in the early weeks, but potentially next week we'll have that up there. But that's going to do it for this week. As always, thank you for listening. I am your host, Derek Helm. And remember,
Just have fun out there.